So I was wondering if you could maybe explain more about what the people's logic was when they were talking about how people who bottom aren't really gay. Like, did they explain more about it? Did they ever give more information about why their thought process is that way?
Well, I think that in a lot of circles, not just the one that I've entered in Hampshire, but also ones that I'm coming from, I've heard a lot of sentiments about how, being the receptive partner of like vaginal penetration is a heterosexual act. You know, like it's like an act that pushes someone out of the realm of being gay into heterosexual, because you still want to be fucked, like assuming like that you might want to be fucked by a guy or like by someone who is like male assigned at birth. So I think that's a lot of the logic that I've heard tossed around behind it. But I also think that inside of that is also like femphobia, you know, like inside of that is biphobia, you know, like, and all sorts of misunderstandings about what sexual practices people actually perform anyways. And where women's bodies play into that regardless, you know? Like assuming that like all heterosexual women are having like penetrative sex, or even that most like heterosexual women are having penetrative vaginal sex with penises that are attached to their partner by some means that we would call biological feasibly, you know? So which is definitely an overstatement of what it means to be a heterosexual woman as much as it is to be an overstatement of what it means to be a feminine bottom, you know?
Also, you know, tying what you were saying into, you know, sensation and people's like different abilities or whatever else, is also like people's thresholds of sensation, and that being different, and people like wanting to reach like different thresholds of sensation to like experience what it is that like is exciting for them, and how that, you know, is very different for each body.
Also, there are studies coming out now that are linking like antidepressant medications with like a decrease in vaginal lubrication, and like how that like also makes like insertive receptive partnership, like sexual partnership, a relative like more difficult than when when that chemical isn't present in the body. And I know that's always a factor that one has to think about in terms of like lubes, because not every lube is made for everybody. But we'll get to that at a later episode.
Something I kept thinking about taking a class at Mount Holyoke, and we were talking about, it was sort of like a queer U.S. history class, and something that came up, I just kept thinking about this one time when I was in 7th grade. I was at like a cast party for something. We were playing some sort of game, and it was one of those never have you ever games. Never have I ever. And one of the questions was like stuck something up my asshole. And the only person who said that he had was this, I think he was a junior at the time. I don't remember his name, but he was like our token out gay guy at the school. And first everyone was like, what? Something's been up your ass? Oh my God, that's disgusting. How could you do that? And then he was just like, guys, I'm gay. It's cool. And like by that time, since everyone was cool, with Scott Fetton was his name, with him being out, it was like, oh, you're gay? That's fine. Put something up your asshole. You know, whatever. I don't know. So that, it doesn't really relate back to that, but it
does, because it's like people couldn't accept that he was putting something in his asshole if he's gay, but if he's straight, you know, like none of that. So pegging out of the question.
Yeah.
Just to go back to what you were saying about people like questioning your queerness based on like you being on the receiving end of penetrative sex, I just think that like it's so weird that there's still this double standard. Like it's like you're not gay enough if you're on the receiving end, but like you're so gay if like you're wearing the cock. Like where does that even come from? Because I feel like at the end of the day, to like assign that value to the phallus, like what you were saying, is still like very much tied to these heterosexual notions. And I don't know, I feel like masculinity goes unchecked like so much just in society at large, but also in queer communities, and that's something that like I've been thinking about lately. And so I don't know, I just like see that coming up in these questions too.
Well, I say I think it also relates back to the idea that like being queer is only about who you have sex with, and like it has nothing to do with like your ideals, you know, where you align yourself politically or your community. Like it's all about who you're fucking and how you're fucking them, and like that's how you're gay. Like that doesn't make any sense at all.
And even like lesbianism, because like I know, like I, like as many few, how Although there are many fewer lesbians at this school, I think like there is definitely that issue. But I think that I've even seen the lesbian community be like, although its history with like topping and bottoming is like interestingly complicated, I feel like the words that we use to talk about like butches who bottom or like femmes who top, I find are like often more sensitive to those differences like within that locked in identity that I find here. And I don't know exactly what that is, or if that's just like reminiscent of Hampshire in particular and not necessarily like a queer community as a whole. But I know that like I can think of a lot more examples that I can think of in lesbian popular culture of talking about a butchy bottom than I can about like thinking about like a queer person who thinks about themselves as like very masculine bottoming and being like very open about it. And I don't necessarily know where that difference for me has sprouted from, or like that difference in me hearing those things has sprouted from.
That's interesting that you say that, because like when I hear that, I think more about like the fact that like queer theory, I guess, is always questioning like, well, if this person is a bottom, then does that make them masculine, or does that make them feminine then? And it's like not about like, oh, like when you're like a butchy bottom, then like that's just what it is. And with queer theory, I feel like everyone would be like, oh, well, if they're the bottom, then maybe they're just not masculine, or like questions like that. Like I've just had people like say things like that. I feel like there's more like questioning in queer theory.
I think I understand. I'm hoping that I'm understanding what you're saying. I like more like there's always like there's a more of a push to continue questioning an identity that like you already like take as your identity. I feel like is how I understand it. You know, I've definitely come in contact with that like with a question of why one would be a bottom, like and exclusively a bottom. You know, like how that could be like a valid choice to be like exclusively a bottom all the time, and like feeling kind of pressured to top as well. I don't know if anybody else like, or if that's something exclusive to me. I don't think it is, but yeah. You know, like since I came into this space and like this community, I feel like I've been more pressured by sexual partners to top in like sexual situations, even when I present myself as exclusively a bottom, and have that be sort of like a judgment call on like whether or not I am like as queer as I say. Like if I could quickly switch from being a bottom to a top and then like being in the middle and then doing some rope bondage, you know, like that is the real like benchmark of like my queerness, rather than like my ability to feel like comfortable and happy as like a femme pillow queen bottom, you know.
Right, and like actually know what you want and name that.
And like receive the power in that, you know, of being like, this is who I am, this is what I want, and this is all I want to go on in the scene, rather than like being subject to the will, like to the whims of another, you know, sexually.
Having the ability to express being a top or a bottom can be dictated by safety and like feelings like with your partner and stuff. Like I know for me it was really hard for a really long time to debate being anything but a bottom after being in some unsafe situations, and like, you know, just not knowing how to give myself power in sexual situations. And so I think that it takes a lot to even like have that conversation about whether you're a top or a bottom, and that it changes a lot as you know, change your identity and figure those things out.
I think it also definitely can like go the other way, because I know I've been in experiences where like I actually, you know, like I was not comfortable with the idea of being a bottom because of being in unsafe situations, you know, like, so it's like you're, you know, so yeah, I think there's definitely like, it's like a mirror.
Right. I definitely agree. Like I came to school like understanding myself to be a top, as no matter whether or not the actions that I was, or like sex acts that I was doing necessarily aligned with that, mostly because of like a fear of being vulnerable in that way again. And I think like once I was able to soothe or like heal some of the issues that were like caused me to be not only just like exclusively a top, but the kind of top that I was at the time, really like helped me be more comfortable with the fact that I am a bottom at this point. And I don't feel like it changes that much for me. Like I don't feel like, but you know, it might, you know, like there's a lot of living ahead, but I know a lot of people who have been bottoms for long times, and a lot of other people who have been tops for even longer. So, and across like gender, like I feel like I know a lot of people who like their identity like as a top or as a bottom has been like across the genders that they've been in their lives and, you know, experiences that they've been into. I feel like one of the times that that talking about non-penetrative or like non-genderly but penetrative acts and topping and bottoming comes into play most in my mind is cocksucking, I think, you know, because like where does that put me, you know, especially if I am engaging at all, like if I'm sucking a partner's strap on or like whatever, you know, context of whatever's going in my mouth at that point. Like what does it mean for me to be to interact with like a partner who does not necessarily identify with their like female assigned genitalia, and like where does that like put them and me, you know, like or is like the gender fucking inherent to it important for like where it is situated as a top and bottom? I don't fucking know at all, but I don't know, it's something that I think about a lot.
This like question keeps reminding me of like when I was in high school and like stupid people would ask me like, how do two girls have sex? And I'd be like, you know, fuck you, and like, you know, trying to like figure out how to answer them, and like I ended up just started saying like, well, you know, like if I decided to answer them, like if they approached me respectfully and like we were having a conversation, I would usually just kind of be like, it's you in my life, it's just kind of like if we felt like we had sex, then we did. It was how like I was like, I don't know, I'm 17, like whatever. But I feel like there's like an element that I keep thinking about with like how to apply, if I'm understanding the question right, but like how to apply or can think about topping and bottoming and non-penetrative acts. Like I feel like there are like acts that you can do that may not be penetrative, but like can have like if I feel like I'm topping somebody or if I feel like I'm bottoming or something, even if I'm not like doing anything, even if I'm not like doing anything in anyone's genitals, like I don't know. That's just what I keep thinking about.
Last semester I was taking a class and we did a sex study in it. I mean, I didn't, but a couple of students did. And there was an interview portion, and during this interview they were like, how do you define sex? You know, like with all the possible things that can mean. And I think that most of the class said it was penetration. So that's like super interesting, you know, in itself. But I remember being in the interview and just sort of being pushed to define, like, this is what, and I'm sort of talking my way through it, like, well, if these are the parties involved, then like this action could happen and this, and you know, the person who was interviewing me was just sort of like, so penetration, right? That's what you think it was. And I was just like, I don't, how anyone could expect you to define sex, like, between anyone. I don't know. It blows my mind.
Because in a sexual education standpoint, I feel like masculinity is assumed to only be the top, you know, like without any questions, or, you know, like maleness is assumed to be top, and, you know, like womanness is assumed to be bottom, and that's like how sex ed is administered, you know? So like there's not a talk about like heterosexual tops and heterosexual bottoms, because like I think that there's this assumption that like all straight women are at the bottom of like penetrative heterosexual sex, and all like straight men are on the top.
The binary always manages to creep into sexual activity, or just like these acts, but there's so much fluidity. I mean, I feel like for me personally, there's a lot of fluidity in engaging in intimate situations that I feel like I don't even conceptualize a binary. I'm just doing it.
Isn't that supposed to be the great thing about sex? Like the abandonment of like these, like those things, you know, and like.
I wrote a paper about how I had sex last night.
Exactly. Actually, I was dictating it while I was having sex last night, so, you know, just to document the journey. So. Yeah.
When you think about straight couples and whether or not those roles can be switched, and whether or not the woman can wear the strap on and things like that, because I know a couple who is really like in a weird place about like he wants it and she doesn't, which is also very interesting, because usually you would think that would be switched too.